Okay, so we're going to start off really with an introduction and defining the challenges that we face with regard to sustainable hydropower. Again, mentioning that we're focusing on Africa, Asia, and the South American context. So what we would like to do is, thank you very much, we would like to bring together world-leading experts from those different regions and to work with others that are possibly in more established parts of the world in terms of the research that's taking place and be able to take the whole area forward in terms of having some real benefit. But just to define the problem, basically in tropical, subtropical, and neotropical and southern temperate rivers in Africa, Asia, and South America, we have large river systems with very high species richness and a high degree of endemism. Second element is that the fresh waters in these regions are hugely threatened and degraded and heavily impacted. And there's a huge demand for the resources that fresh water provides in those developing areas. In many of these developing regions, we also have large numbers of people that are dependent on the rivers and the fisheries that they provide to maintain their quality of life, their income, and in many areas, such as Econ, for example, their main source of protein. And these regions, because of the fact we have these high demands for exploitation, we have high degree of endemism and species richness, many of them are defined as being biodiversity hotspots. So our aims are to improve the sustainability of hydropower in Africa, Asia, South America, protect the fisheries on which low-income communities depend for their quality of life and food security, and advance environmental impact mitigation technologies and strategies to be able to more sustainably operate and plan our dams from the cradle through to the grave. And what we'd like to do is disseminate knowledge and build research capability between the global north and south, and between south and south to benefit other developing nations. So as I mentioned, last year we developed the SHAASAN network, and we had a series of really great webinars, well attended, with over 100 participants in webinars that were conducted in South America, Asia, and Africa. In 2022, we're going to hold the physical events. The first one starting here in Colombia with our colleagues from the University of Antioquia hosting it, and then we will have a second one either in Asia or possibly Africa. The plan in 2023 is to become self-sustaining, to be able to acquire funding to continue these events and to develop the network still further, and then 2024 to really demonstrate real impact, outreach and engagement, for example, through policy briefs and scientific research programs. We've already had early success. We've had a project funded by the Royal Academy of Engineers called Fish for Peace, and that's being led by Andrew Bowers at the University of Southampton. And it's also involving multiple people from developing nations in the Southern Hemisphere. This is our team. As you can see, a very diverse group of people from Africa, Asia, and South America, all experts in their fields with a diversity of skills and capabilities from engineering through to the social sciences and ecology and biology. We really need to acknowledge the important work and funding provided from the Global Challenges Research Fund, and also all our partners and supporters in this initiative. So today we have lots of presentations. I'm not going to go through these, but we've got, again, people from all over the world that are either presenting physically or virtually. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Luz, who's going to talk a little bit more about our schedule today.
Welcome. Paul already gave us an introduction about this task force about dams or impoundments. It is a pleasure to receive these a group of work. We are the host of this activity. We will be having two symposiums. One is about sustainability in the business of energy, in the energy business, particularly hydropower. And the second one is about restocking The first one will be today and tomorrow, and the second will be held on Friday. We have the symposium, which is the one we will be having today. Paul presented or introduced some of the organizers, the universities that are also organizing this event, also the business and corporations that are funding this event, and also the institutions that will be participating with presentations in this symposium. We also have some rules for since this is hybrid symposium, there are some people who are here in person and some people who are joining us virtually. Please turn off your cameras so we can have a very stable connection. Second, after the presentations, there will be some Q&A sessions, so the speakers can answer questions. So if you have any questions during a speaker's presentation, please include them on the chat box, because some people will be taking the questions from that chat. So please, if you have a question, include it or type it in on the chat box. There will be 2 people gathering those questions so they can be asked to the speaker. Today is the first day. We will be talking about environmental sustainability and hydropower. The people in charge will be Paul Kemp and Hector. Tomorrow we will be talking about management strategies. Today we'll be talking about challenges, and the people in charge will be Andrew Wolf and Hector, and the last day about restocking. And we will have also the participation of National University or Universidad Nacional. And Hector and myself will be leading this. So I will turn it over to Hector so he can give us more details about the program.
Hello. And we got people from Africa, Asia, and South America. Most cases here are from South America, and we got also cases from Africa and Asia. So our first presentation will pass to Frank Massese, because we miss Nguyen and Anne. So the first presentation will be of Frank. Frank, can you please pass to the front while I introduce you? Frank Massese is a biologist, a PhD, a professor from the University of Eldoret in Kenya. He works mainly with aquatic ecology, and work mainly with fishes and macroinvertebrates. His main interest is in driving land problems to the ecosystems and also to the aquatic ecosystems. The presentation will be now. The floor is you, Frank, and thank you.
I'm going to talk about the situation on Kenyan fishes and what are the kind of threats the fishes are facing going forward. And I was saying that in Kenya, which is a case study in this case, we have 2 major drainages, the easterly flowing rivers that connect the highlands, the central highlands to the Indian Ocean. The river flows to Victoria, which is famous for the highest number of indigenous species of cichlids. But because of productions, we have lost almost 100 species. That's one of the challenges we are facing. And so the studies we have done in rivers flowing into Victoria, we have around 15 rivers. on 7 measures. And what we are seeing is that because of land use issues and land use change, there's quite a number of dams. And actually there's some being planned in the lower reaches. And changes along the rivers. In the headwaters of most afrotropical streams that we have very few species. When you first, third order, we only have 8 or 1 or 2 species. But as the river becomes larger, the fish abundance and diversity increases elsewhere in other systems. Then we have most rivers, communities living along them depend a lot on catches from these systems for their livelihoods. But over the years, there have been major declines because of a number of issues, including water pollution, of harvesting of the fishes, and other issues. So when it comes to barriers to fish passage, one of the major topics being addressed is the impact of dams. But in Africa, I think we have the lowest density of dams, but the most issues are around the quality and the quantity of water in the systems. Because of land use change, population are increasing, there's loss of forests, conversion of forests to agricultural land. So there's a lot of sedimentation in the rivers. And several dams are also planned in some of the major systems. And the key challenge is that there's no incorporation of fishways, most of the designing of this dam. So we are likely to experience more impacts when it comes to fish migrations going forward, because in all the major rivers, at least there's one dam planned for irrigation and hydropower. And most of the seasonal rivers, actually, the countries are 2/3 arid or semi-arid. So it's only 1/3 that hosts more than 70% of the human population. So there's very high population densities in these areas and a lot of absorption of water for irrigation. But also there's a lot of organic matter input from untreated sewage. But also in these systems, we have hippos. In South America, I know there's an example of Colombia where we have introduced hippos. So they defecate a lot in the system and pollute water during the dry season. These are examples of areas where during the dry season, you find that the river is disconnected from the lower and upstream in terms of both the water quality and the distribution of fishes. And in Amare, we have one example where a lot of fish kills occur during the end of the dry season when it starts raining after a long dry spell. So the incoming water, because of mobilizing the organic matter in the soil, causes anoxia, like poor conditions. And we have annual fish kills in part of these rivers, and the population have really declined. So we are trying to understand, working with scientists from South Africa. Gordon will be talking on fish migrations tomorrow or the other day. Then we are trying to understand what are the requirements of the species in terms of velocities, depth, and water levels, and in terms of water quality generally. So we need knowledge on recruitment patterns, habitat use and behavior. We also used to assess the impacts of habitat change, like land use, water quality on fish populations. Data on fish passage is non-existent, as most of the dams, the operators of the dams are not keeping records on fish kills or other. Environmental impact assessments don't focus on the biology of the river. They are mostly interested in water quality. So some of the management options are on watershed management issues, waste management, treatment of sewage, and also trying to monitor the abstraction levels of water so that we have a balance between what human needs and environmental needs in the system taken care of. So we have had some of the studies in the system, like trying to understand what's the amount of water available for abstraction against other needs. But these studies, again, have been done in very few systems. So, and they have to be linked with the requirements of the different fish species, which have has not been done yet. And obviously, the government, because of trying to minimize land use and rehabilitation of the catchment scale, so this being done, so there's also a need to minimize points of pollution by waste treatment and management, and by monitoring the changes that are occurring. So that's my talk, and thank you.
Thank you, Frank, for your nice presentation. It was very helpful for us to. It was very helpful for us to understand and see which is the African reality in this side of the continent. So we got now 5 minutes for questions. I got one done here in the chat. The question is for Dr. Frank. Say, do the Kenyan universities offer degree programs in fisheries or related subjects?
Okay, so I was saying that in Kenya, actually in East Africa, the University of Eldoret was the first to have a degree program in fisheries and aquatic science, which started around 1990. There are quite a number of universities in Kenya now offering the program, and we are training students from diploma to PhD levels. And the rest of universities in Eastern Africa are offering these courses. But the challenge is that most students don't prefer this course, and so in terms of the student and the capacity level is quite low, because so it's an area that needs more capacity building.
Thank you, Frank. We got another questions from the people outside this room. They are wondering which are the more bigger or large challenges to fishes, to face fishes in Kenya today, the most large challenges from there.
Yeah, I may say that the largest challenge we are having now is to do with water quality and quantity more than, because we are seeing most of the river systems, because of pollution, point and non-point source pollution, waste management is not well done, so there's a lot of input of sewage from municipalities and industries. So when looking at fish distribution, there's a clear impact of water quality issues. And because of the semi-aridness of the larger Kenya, you get that most of the river systems are drying up during the wet dry season, and that really has an impact on fish communities. But going forward, also, the remaining major rivers are facing a threat of dam construction because of increased demand for hydropower. So fish migration is a challenge that is emerging.
Thank you, Frank. We got now 1 minute for the people here. And we got another question here, which is, could you please give us a brief overview of the licensing process for new dams and how fish passages are considered in Kenya? Thank you.
So dam construction, I think once you receive the tender for construction of a dam, you have to do an impact assessment first on potential impact of the dam on the environment and what are the mitigation measures that you are putting in place. Then annually, once the dam is under operation, you have to do an environmental audit. But I've seen some of this during the design, I'm yet to see a dam in Kenya with a design for fish migration or fish passage. I got the opportunity to visit one of the dams, which is under construction right now. Is that there was no such feature for. Even the dam, we are having an example, a case study from Kenya, is that they are diverting water through a series of cascades outside the river system. And you find that the downstream riverage during the dry season has no water at all. So it's a series of pools. So in terms of taking into consideration the requirements of the fishes, it's like it's given the last priority in terms of the management of these fishes. All they want is what is the amount of hydropower that they can get from the system, and what's the amount of water they can get for irrigation. I think in terms of fish protection, I think there is not much being done. Even the environmental audit experts hardly report on the status of the rivers in terms of fishes when they are doing this annual evaluation of the impact of dams. So that's a challenge. I think we need, as Paul said, and the policy going forward to inform on how this should be designed and incorporated in regular monitoring of this system.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Your presentation was very helpful for us. We can see that there are some similarities with South America, but also some particularities, as I see with the water keep for human consumption, I guess. So that's a bigger problem in Africa, as I see. So thank you for your presentation. And now we move to a welcome presentation from the Grupo EPM.
On behalf of Medellin's public companies, I want to send a special greetings to all the attendants of the 16th Colombian Congress of Ichthyologists that gathers international and national experts to the academy, experts, authorities, and people that are interested and know more about these issues. A very special congratulations to the Colombian Ichthyologists Association for the commemoration of 30 years of foundation. It had been 30 years generating important knowledge for the country in terms of impact management and in the profundization in the conservation of these important resource. This Congress represents a great importance for Medellin's public companies because this allows us to know another experiences in other latitudes and also to share with you our experiences as a power generation company in the management of this theme of fish and tropical reservoirs. For your information, EPM has 9 big reservoirs located in different altitude floors, from 400 meters above sea level to 2,200 meters. And it makes up 13 hectares water meter that are equivalent with 20,000 soccer fields. That altitude characteristics and those thermal floors give our reservoirs a great research opportunity because they become a natural laboratory, which have different characteristics, and we have basins that supplies water of excellent quality. We also have basins that receive all the tributaries from 12 municipalities, which is the case of the Damme porticos. Problems that add up and have a very high incidence in the quality of the fisheries product. That's why EPM have seen in the academy, in the university, the opportunity to know more about the reservoirs and about its ecological dynamics, because for us knowledge is the basis to generate management strategies of all these problems. That includes environmental contingencies and strategies for the fish conservation. These investigations and alliances that we realize with the Academy
will help us know in a deeper way these ecosystem dynamics that occur with the fish that live in the dams, because around these dams there are communities that are being benefited from this type of resource. Other communities base their livelihoods on fishing. This is why we need to conduct deeper studies, genetic studies, reproduction studies, and this is a great contribution to science and the communities that benefit from this resource. This alliance between EPM and the academia has been around for several years. There are investments in the research and development, and with the help of the communities, we are committed to work for the sustainability of the planet. We hope you have a very interesting seminar, and let's hope it benefits everybody.
With thanks to the EPM, which is the Empresas Públicas de Medellín. This means public enterprises from Medellín, with their interest with the environmental issues and related to fishes. So also I would like to extend to the Ichthyos for let us doing our workshop here. The next participant will be Luz. Could you give me a clue, please? So the next presentation is again from Africa. The person who is going to present is Amare Mezgebu. He is from Ethiopia. Amare Mezgebu is a lecturer at Bahir University from Ethiopia. He has interest in fisheries and aquatic sciences, with a broad interest in freshwater ecosystems and environmental management. He has a master's degree in aquatic ecosystem and in environmental management. And his main question addressing science is the aquatic ecosystem health assessment and monitoring. He got experience in fisheries and also in macroinvertebrates from Africa. So thank you, Amare, for being here. And now the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Hector. And thank you so much for all of the organizers of this physical meeting. So today I'll give a short brief about the conservation challenges and management strategies of fish resource in Ethiopia. I'm from Ethiopia, Barra University, and currently I'm in Japan for my PhD study in the University of Shiga Prefecture. So my talk will be not as such a detailed research of a single watershed or a single river or lake, but it's kind of a comprehensive overview of the conservation challenges and management strategies of fish resources in Ethiopia. So maybe a bit shallow, but I hope it will give us some insights for future collaboration and to give you some information about the fish resources in Ethiopia and the major challenges they are facing. So my talk will focus on these aspects, mainly on the fish resources of Ethiopia, including some the water resources as well as that. So conservation challenges of the fish resources and also some of the suggested management strategies and the way forward, what we shall do. So I will give certain points on this regard. So when you see the water source of Ethiopia, Ethiopia is the water tower of Eastern Africa. So which means we have surface water, particularly the rivers which are flowing from Ethiopia to our neighbors countries like, for example, when you see here, the Blue Nile is flowing into Sudan and then Egypt and the Mediterranean Sea. So we have also other rivers like the Wabi Chevele, Ganale, and also Awash River, particularly Chevele and Ganale flowing into Somalia, and also the Omo Gibi, the Omo River is also flowing into Kenya. So we actually give a huge amount of water resource to our neighboring countries and we can't get a single drop of water from our neighbors. So we have also lakes, certain lakes, including Lake Tana, which consists about 50% of our freshwater lakes. And also there are some, lakes in the Rift Valley zone. So in general, we have huge amount of water resource, surface water resource, and also some groundwater resource, which recharge our rivers and lakes. So we have these figures of lakes, reservoirs, rivers, and small streams. When you see the different benefits these freshwater resource provide for us is fishery. There are certain communities who are dependent on the fish resources by catching fish in the wild, and also our energies. Most of our energy is coming entirely from the hydropower generation through our rivers and our lakes also. So we are also using these rivers and diversion of extraction of our lakes also for irrigation. So our agriculture is somehow dependent on these freshwater ecosystems. We are also using domestic water supply for both rural and urban areas for domestic use. We use these rivers and lakes, and these water ecosystems are also used for tourism purpose, for recreation, and also some cultural practice are common on these water bodies. So these resources are really important for us, and we are also landlocked countries with, as you see from the map, there is no ocean. Ocean gate for us. So these are huge resources for us. When I come to the fish resource, we have around 200 fish species, and from which 194 are indigenous, and the other 6 are exotic species. So around 40 are also endemic to Ethiopia. This is according to the study of Abdeslah 2012. So we hope that there are more than these 200 species, and we are still studying on the diversity of different fish species, and we believe that's not fully discovered. Our resources are not fully discovered, and we are hoping there are some new species also. So when we see separately one of our Great Lake, the Lake Tana, which consists about 50% of the freshwater resource, have 28 fish species, from which 21 are endemic, and the 18 are the labiobarb species, which are the only remaining cyprinid species flock in the world. And these species are migratory, and some of these species are endangered due to causes that I will discuss in my later slides. So these resources actually are found in the biggest lake, and they are also experiencing a lot of challenges, particularly from the anthropogenic activities. So when you see the Ethiopian fishery, it comes, I can say, exclusively from the inland waters. Our aquaculture is not as such improving or growing. So most of the fish are coming from the wild. So people catch from the rivers and lakes. And the subsistence artisanal fishery is one of the most important economic activities in the nation. So our fish production potential is estimated to be 94,500 ton per year, but due to number of activities, a number of challenges, the production is only 30%, and even this production is not well processed for the right consumers. So when I come to the main challenges, the main challenge for the dwindling or the deterioration of the freshwater ecosystems in general and the fish resources in particular is habitat destruction. So this habitat destruction are mainly by development activities, including hydropower and also irrigation, the diversion of rivers and streams, and also some land use policy problems, which means that most of the watershed is utilized for agriculture activities, and industries and other development activities are just planted on the riparian area of the rivers and streams, which leads to high load of sediments and nutrients, and also this diversion causes the the blockage of the migration of fish, including the labiobarb species and also other migratory species of fish. So when you see this, the first image is the Gelda River, which is one of the tributary of Lake Tana. And this river is diverted for irrigation activity, but the bad thing is even the irrigation is not working well because the ditching, the channel is already filled by sediments, and still the structure is under there for 5 years without giving service for irrigation, and also it blocks the upward migration of the fish from the lake to the upstream of this river, and one of the reasons for the decrease in abundance and that fish is the blockage of this river. So the other photo is from Annabelle's Hydropower, which our project, the Fish for Peace project, is focusing on. So this water is directly coming from the Lake Tana, and go underground, and after moving, flowing to 12 kilometers down underground, it generates electricity. So here, it's evident that fish killed by direct turbine killing is evident, and also it also affects the downstream migration of these rivers, because there is another river down to the Bellas River, so it's already blocked by this development project. So these are the main challenges. So the other is the invasive land species, or including water hyacinth and that of Potomogotan illinois. So water hyacinth is one of the threat to our lakes, not only Lake Tana. Now it's also manifested in other water bodies as well. So this is water hyacinth from Lake Tana, which is emerged recently, not more than 10 years, but it covers most part of the lake. I mean, I can say the northern part of the lake is almost in the shoreline, is covered by this lake, and it causes huge devastation. So the causes for this proliferation of water hyacinth is high nutrient input from the watershed due to land use policy problems. So one is problem for the other. So there's another also invasive species, which is called Potomogotan illinois, which emerged 3 years before in the lake. It's submerged, and it's really affecting not only the shoreline, but also the open water. So the other is pollution. So wastes from the urban area, industries are polluting rivers and finally to lakes. And since this high nutrient load also from agriculture is one of the problem. So this agriculture contributes sediment, which decreases actually the depths of the lakes and rivers, so which is makes good for the emergence of water hyacinth. So pollution use, people use washing activities and other activities on the shoreline of the lake. So they directly add some phosphorus and some nitrates to the lake, which also again increases the nutrient level in the lake. So the other is overexploitation of the fish resource. Huge amount of fishermen are employed in the lake by harvesting fish. So these fishermen are using also very poor technologies for harvesting, which leads to just catching the fish which come to breeding for migrate for breeding and use very destructive fishing methods. So even after harvesting, the processing is also the post-harvest is also not as such clean and as expected. So they, after filleting, they try to dry by sun, and which is not hygiene, and also which is not clean, has problems, and also the cost is very low. And these people are actually not sending this dried fish for not selling for the people in Ethiopia, but sending also this to illegally to Sudan, and which directly or indirectly affected the economy of the nation. So the management strategies actually more or less, or the water bodies in Ethiopia are under stress problem due to number of challenges that I mentioned before. So there are some management strategies suggested. The first one is like developing and implementing some legislation and regulations, particularly on the threatened species conservation and controlling illegal fishing and some area closure and seasonal closure, at least to avoid catching some breeding fish which goes for breeding. But when you come to here, there are some initiations or some start at regional and national level to develop some regulations and guidelines, but the implementation is actually the problem. And sometimes even the guideline and the legislation is not as such full and for as such not easy for implementation. The other is just to reduce the nutrient flow and also the sediment flow into the water bodies. The development of integrated watershed management plan is also suggested as one of the management strategies. So this has already planned to be implemented by in Lake Tana, which is, as I said before, covers huge amount of our water resources and highly affected by different variety of human activities. So this integrated water resource management plan will also reduce the proliferation of the invasive alien species exploitation. So as it reduces sediment and nutrient there, it will be helpful, but I think it needs a lot of coordination and commitment to do the watershed management in the watershed actually. The other is restocking and public awareness. So we are celebrating World Fish Migration Day in Bahir. So people are joining from different areas are joining and celebrating and creating awareness on the migratory fish species. So this is the first image is the World Fish Migration Day in 2022. So I took this from the Bahir University Communication Office. So they are restocking some fish to the Rib Reservoir, and they are creating awareness for people from the local community and also from the government. So they celebrate in this way. And in 2020 again, we celebrated World Fish Migration Day in Gelda River. So this is the structure which blocks the flow of, the migration of fishes from upward. So we call people from different sectors, including people working in the water sector, mainly from the hydropower and the irrigation sector, how the structures they are building for development activities are really blocking the flow of fishes, the migration of fishes to upward, and we are creating awareness. So here is also some awareness creation campaign. So it's a running campaign. It's in 2016 actually, and also boat race campaign. So people who win in the running and the boat race are awarded finally. And there was actually awareness creation symposium later for people and for the community, and people come from the government sector. So in general, when I come to my conclusion, Ethiopia has huge potential of freshwater and also fish resources. Still, the fish resources are under study or under discovery. So But habitat destruction, invasive species, and also pollution and overfishing are the major challenges for the freshwater ecosystems and particularly for the fish resources. So awareness creation, setting regulations and restocking for depleted fish resource, and also developing integrated watershed management plan are suggested management options. And as way forward, we are still working on research on the fish resources, collaborative research, particularly on the diversity. Still, our fishes are described as morphologically actually. So taxonomic study is also still important to see what are the resources we have, and develop some policy suggestions for decision makers, particularly people from the government need concrete reasons and concrete evidence how the development activities or how the policies are actually affecting, and also how can they consider the fish aspect during formulation of some policies. So incorporation of sophisticated technology for water-based development projects, particularly for hydropower projects, we have a huge plan to develop hydropower projects and also some irrigation projects in each river and the lakes. So actually incorporation and also updating of technologies while proposing this development projects is very important, and working on this area is very critical. So still the awareness creation needs to do in detail. So there are people actually who are not aware fully about our fish resources, and mostly people look the water, not the fish and the other resources. So just designing different awareness creation methods by universities and by government offices was concerned on the fish and the environment are the way forward that we are actually focusing to work. So this is actually my presentation in short. So I can answer if you have any questions. Thank you so much. Gracias.
Thank you, Amare. So we got now time for a couple of questions. If you are able, please, Amare, can you put your camera on just to make a couple of questions? And
okay.
Let me see. We got a question here. So can you hear me, Amare? It's okay?
Yes, yes.
Yes, the question is the fish community in Lake Tana very different to that in the Vélez River? And have there been any ecological impacts associated with transferring water between the two water bodies?
Okay, thank you so much. Actually, the fish resource from Lake Tana is particularly the Labiobarbus species are the only separate species in the world. So they are different. So basically, the Vélez River and the Lake Tana was not connected before, but due to artificial channel, the Lake Tana is drilled and channelized underground and connected to the Vélez River. So which means after the water generating electricity to underground in the hydropower, in ballast hydropower, it discharged into the river. So which means actually the fish can enter into the channel and directly chopped by eaten by the turbine, and also I mean there's no fish which pass into the river, so it's totally disconnected. So fishes are also can't move upward from the Vélez River to up to the Tana, so somehow it is disconnected now. But the fish resource in the Lake Tana is different, yes.
Thank you, Amare.
Okay. Yep.
So we got another question. Just a minute, please. We got a question here which says, the water hyacinth looks like a really big problem. Where did it originally come from? And what plans are in place to try and control or eradicate it, if any? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So the issue regarding water hyacinth is, I think there are different speculations that people are talking. So, I mean, as you know, this water hyacinth is good in absorbing nutrients or use it in the treatment of wastes, organic wastes. So people say that they bring for treating industrial wastes. And some people also say that it has some flowers, beautiful flowers. So they bring it for some ornamental purpose. And there are also people who say that it comes by birds. I think it has seeds. So birds can easily bring seeds from one area to another area and now distributing to different water bodies in our resources. So actually, there are different methods of eradicating these water hyacinth. We are trying a lot of things, I can say. So we are trying the physical removal method, which the government is allocating a huge amount of money for physical removal, but it's not as such. It's effective, but we can't say it's the right method. I mean, where people try to harvest the huge biomass and try to collect in a certain area, but in the flooding season or in the rainy season, it again redistribute and occupy the other area. So we are also trying to use some biological methods using some insects which can eat the water hyacinth, but I think that's not as such also effective to a large area. It's effective in a small, at a laboratory level or at a small level, but when you see at a large area, it's not effective. And still, people are working on using a combination of methods. Like they're also planning some chemical methods, but they are worrying also the effects on the biota there, the fauna and flora, what will the effect is there. So mainly the physical removal method is implemented and also I can say accepted by the government, and a huge amount of resources are allocated for that. But still, the area coverage is reduced by removing that, but still the problem is increasing, particularly in the rainy season. The flood redistribute the collected big biomass and causes actually to cover a huge area of the lake.
Thank you, Amare. So, and concerning the channel, now we are closing your participation. So I would like to thank you and Frank for giving us a nice picture and very helpful and informative from the east part of Africa. It was very detailed to understand. So now we should pass to our next participant, which is Mezgebu. So we will have a presentation about the ASEAN context. And if Luz can give me a clue, I propose the next presentation and then a coffee break because we are delayed. It's okay? So before the coffee break, we got a presentation from Mezgebu. He is the vice head of the Fisheries Ecology and Aquatic Resources Division from the Research Institute for Aquaculture #2 in Vietnam. He takes research into ecology of freshwater fishes, impacts anthropogenic activities on aquatic ecosystems, and also mitigation measures to protect and conserve river fishes in the Mekong Basin. So we got nice examples from Mezgebu about the Mekong River, one of the most important rivers in the world. So also the river is very important for the people as food supply. So this is a nice example for the SHAASAN network about how fisheries, dams, and people are related. So Mezgebu, the floor is yours. So can you start?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yeah, it's quite early morning in Ho Chi Minh City. As you know, my colleague, Mr. Nguyen, trying to present it in person, but he couldn't make it. So now I'm going to talk about driving factor to the decline in fish yield in the Mekong Delta. This is my plan of my talk. First, I'm going to show you an overview of the Mekong fisheries, then talk about fish migration. And the important part of my presentation is the factor driving decline in inland fisheries. And if we have some time left, so I'm going to show you a video clip about Cambodia dive fishery. It's amazing fisheries.
Yes, we got time, so you can do it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's about 4 minutes. As you know, the Mekong River is the longest Southeast in Asia, with almost about 5,000 kilometers long, running through 6 countries, started in China and then flow down to the sea. The Mekong River is divided into 2 parts, the upper part and the lower part. The upper part located in China with about 24% of total basin. And majority of the Mekong Basin belong to the lower basin with 76% in 5 countries, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And each year the river discharges a lot of water to the sea. And fishing is an important employment in the basin. The Mekong River plays an important role to the society. For example, about 5 million people engage in the fishery for some extent. For aquaculture, the value of the aquaculture product is about 5 billion US$ per year. And most of the value is from the Mekong Delta of Vietnam. In terms of contribution to the national GDP, you can see Cambodia is the highest with 18% of total GDP, followed by Laos with 13%. Vietnam and Thailand is very low, at just about 2%. Here are some more important figures of the Mekong fisheries. There are about over 1,000 fish species. These species produce about 4.4 million tons per year, equivalent to about 17 billion US$ per year. And over 60 million people live in the basin, and most of the population participate in fishing and mainly about part-time fishing. They consume about 50 kilos of fish product per year per person. This is the structure of the red list category from IUCN. The good thing is that no species are extinct in the river. However, about 8% under question. Here are the 2 iconic species in the Mekong under critical endangered. The Mekong stingray and the Mekong giant catfish. They are monster and long-lived species. Another group with 40% under near question and least concern. And the rest 52% are either not evaluated or data deficient. In fact, more and more species are questioned recently because of many factors, and I'm going to show you later on. Here is the life cycle of most Mekong fish species. The blue line is the water level in 1 year period from January to December. Most Mekong species they spawn in May to June, where water level increase because of rain. The larvae grow up in the seasonal flooded areas. They tend to move back to the river at the end of the flooding season in December. So on a video clip at the end, it will show you the way the local fishers they target these migratory species. They get a ton of fish during a short period of time. This is the map of fish spawning ground. On the left, there is a waterfall named Cornfall you can see in the picture here. Many Mekong fish species trying to migrate to the waterfall for spawning, especially below the waterfall, as you see the map with a big yellow dot. It is a spawning area. And fishing is excited in this area. One typical fishing gear is used for fishing. You can see some picture on the right. This is one type of chaff. It's very simple and made by bamboos. As you know, fish tend to migrate up for spawning, I mean up to the fawn, the quarter fawn, but they will push back with quarter current when they get tired. So they drift into the chaff. You can see a man sit upright on the top. They just sit there and then collect fish. So they are really smart. Some Mekong fish species are very special. About 5% they migrate between fresh and marine waters, like North American salmon. There are 3 subgroups like anadromyi, catadromyi, and amphidromyi. You can see definition of each group. For example, anadromyi species, they grow up at the sea but migrate to river for spawning like salmon. So I'm going to show you some migration of some of these species. The first species I want to show you is the Mekong catfish, the Pancasius gramfi. Some people call as Mekong salmon as their migration is similar to salmon. Suppose we have 3 different environments, marine, brackish, and freshwaters, as you see here on the top. A recent study on ozoic microchemistry found that this species grow up in the Mekong estuary or in the coastal area. But they migrate about 1,000 kilometers to the Mekong River for spawning. However, they are at least 3 dams in this area. 1 on ready built, and 2 dams are planning to build along their migration routes. These species migrate for a long distance to get to the spawning ground, but these dams prevent them to get to the spawning ground. We also found another species that have similar migration pattern, the Pancasius meconiensis. The second species, Angular eel, you may know about this species, but because they distribute in many rivers. We also found that this species they spawn at sea, but migrate to the Mekong River for feeding. Here are some eel we caught in the Mekong River about 700 to 1,000 kilometers from the sea. They really big and very expensive. Now I'm going to talk about important part of my presentation, the factor driving decline in inland fishery yield. So we interview about over 1,000 fishers in the Mekong Delta in different tree habitats, the mainstream, tributary, and coastal area. We asked them about the change of their catch rates, feed land, and which factor contribute to the decline in their catch rates. And here are our finding. You can see most of them said their catch is declining and declining. On average, about 90% of fishers said their feed biomass were declining. 5% no change, 3% don't know why, and only 1% increase. So similar to feed land, the fish size got smaller. So when we look at the statistics, we also found the same trend. Feed yield decline over time, decline about over 50% in the period of 15 years. Here are potential causes for the decline. The fish identified 11 major factors. The most important factors are illegal fishing and overfishing. Under perspective of from scientists, it's almost the same. They found 4 group factors contribute to the decline in fish catch. The first factor is hydrology. Higher flood will produce more fish. The second factor is floodplain environment. More aquatic tree or vegetation will produce more fish. Other factors such as connectivity between habitats and fishing pressures. Here are irrigation structure and dam in the Lower Mekong Basin. There are over 10,000 of irrigation structures like weir or sluice gates. For hydropower dam, hundreds of them are planning to build in the basin. So connectivity between habitat become important issue in the basin because migratory species contribute about 37% of total catch, equivalent to 600,000 tons. So under impact of hydropower dam, so for the Mekong fish species, about 9% of total Mekong fish are under very high at risk, 68% are medium, and 22% have no or little impact. However, about fish yield, 41% of total yield are very high risk, 9% are medium, and 52% have no or little risk. So just summarize my presentation, like the Mekong fishery important fishery for food security for million people living in the basin, but the fish production it tend to decline and make the contribute to the decline like illegal fishing, overfishing, hydropower, and irrigations. And we need something like master plan or effective mitigation measure or conservation to protect the important fisheries. So the next slide is the video of Cambodian fisheries. So it very well known and very important fishery in the Mekong Delta of Cambodia. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Yeah, that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Anne. Your presentation was very nice, and this show us what we want to present with our network, which is the direct use of fish resources and also the problems related with dams and land use. And we got 2 questions for you. The first one is that you show a conceptual model of fish migration in the Mekong and also larval dispersal that played an important role. So how much is known about movements of the early life stages of migratory fish species in the Mekong River? Thank you.
Yeah, a majority of the Mekong fish species, they are migratory for a short or long distance, but for long distance, it's about hundreds of species, and they contribute about 37% of total catch, equivalent to about something about 600,000 tons. So a lot of species, they tend to migrate, especially during the spawning season, and at the end of flooding season, they migrate from the flooded area to the river. So something like dams, or people are trying to build some fishway, but scientists, they said that it not feasible because of million ton of fish migrate in a short period of time. So fishway, and it's not able to deal with that situation.
Okay, thank you, Anne. The next question is about the conservation statuses of fishes in the Mekong River, a large river with more than 1,000 species. So the question is, seeing all these uses and interventions that we got in the Mekong River, how is possible that so few species have conservation uses, as you show us 8 to 10% of them? Are they really well classified? What can you tell us about this? Thank you.
Yeah, there are some conservation measures we're trying to do it. The first thing is about we identify some deep pool along the Mekong River. During the dry season, the water is very low. So water tend to move to the deeper area we call deep pool for surviving during the dry season. So we identify some important deep pools, and also we talk with the local fisher to establish like community-based management. So we're trying to take the local people in the management things. So that the thing we are trying to do and protect our important fisheries.
Thank you, Am. As I said, your presentation was very nice and helpful for understand how working so large rivers in Asia. So I thank you for your presentation. So our next presentation will be introducing the South American context. We got 4 examples from this continent, one from Bolivia, another for Chile, other from Brazil, and also for Colombia. So our next participant is Paul van Damme. He is a Belgian biologist, which now lives in Bolivia. He works with fisheries and also aquatic mammals. And his foundation calls Faunagua. Faunagua is an ONG working since 2004 in Bolivia, works mainly with research oriented to sustainable development and also working sustainability with people, also management of hydrobiology and also wetlands in Bolivia. So our next guest will give us a picture about some rivers from South America, the Madeira River, one of the important tributaries of the Amazon River, and also will give us some pictures and some examples of fisheries from this region of the world. So now the floor is yours. Thank you, Paul. You are the next.
Yeah, good afternoon. I will have a short talk on fisheries and dams in the Madeira River Basin. First, I would like to indicate that my talk is the result of teamwork. And apart from the organizations and networks, the SARDI network, which are mentioned, I would like to give special credit to the University of Porto Velho and also IRD from France. I've taken the liberty to not only talk on fish and dams, but also on some other subjects. So my apologies. I've divided my talk in 3 parts. I will give a short introduction on the Madeira River Basin, and then I will explain how we try to understand the migration patterns of fish and also river dolphins, their sensibility to river fragmentation and the impact caused by dams. Now I will give a very short introduction on how we in the future can keep rivers free flowing and provide some prospects for the Madeira River Basin. Okay, thank you very much. So the Madeira River is one of the most important Amazon tributaries in terms of water and sediment transport. This river basin transports almost 50% of all the sediment load in the Amazon. The Madeira Basin is shared by 3 countries. Brazil overlaps with 40%, Bolivia with 40%, and Peru with a little bit more than 10%. At the right, you can see an interesting map published recently by Fleischmann, in which you can see actually 3 very important characteristics of this river basin. The red arrow is showing the middle Madeira, which has 19 rapids, which represent an important barrier for some migrating fish. And caused by this series of rapids in the upstream parts, marked with a D here, you can see a very extensive floodplain, which is known as the Mojos Lowlands, which is one of the most extensive floodplains in the Amazon basin. The Madeira River Basin is characterized by a very high aquatic biodiversity. In the middle and lower Madeira, the people of the University of Porto Velho have counted 1,057 species. And only in the Bolivian upper Madeira basin, we have counted 806 species. Overall, in 2020, the count in the complete basin was 1,406 species. So this is a river basin with an extremely high aquatic biodiversity. The Madeira River Basin is threatened by known threats, actually deforestation in the upper basins, habitat degradation, gold exploitation, especially in the upper Madeira of the Peru basin, and also by invasive species, especially now by the Arapaima gigas, which is invading Peru and Bolivia, where it before did not occur. The dams are a quite recent impact. The most important threat for migratory fish now is the presence of two run-off river dams, which are located in the middle Madeira basin, which are the Jirau and Santo Antonio dams, two run-off river dams with very poor and inefficient fish transposition systems. And in the middle, you can have you can see the lateral channel, which has been constructed to transport migrating fish in the Santo Antonio power station. And at the right, you can see the lift system, which should eventually be able to transport fish from Brazil to Bolivia. But both of these systems are working very badly. If we look the river basin, we can see that most of hydropower is at this moment located in the Andean part of the basin, in the upper part between 3,000 and 4,000. At the upper left, for example, you can see a map which we drafted for the electricity company between 4,000 meter and 300 meter, in which you can see that the higher parts of the Andean are the parts with a higher potential, whereas the lower parts have a low potential for hydro generation. In the lower part, you can see, first as a result of this, the present ubication of the hydropower stations in Bolivia, with a very important presence of existing hydropower stations between 2,000 and 4,000. And then in the northern part, we have also two projected run-off river projects in the Amare basin, which is shared by Bolivia and Brazil. And then the black circle actually shows where there is a very high demand for the construction of run-off river projects in the sub-Andean region. At the right, you can see the stations, the hydropower stations, which have the most important impact in the Madeira basin, which are the Jirau and Santo Antonio, which are located in the middle Madeira basin. And these stations actually impact quite a lot the entire migratory fish fauna in the Madeira basin. This map from Anderson from 2018 is quite interesting because it also shows the high biodiversity of fish in all these basins. So we can imagine that these hydropower stations located in the middle Madeira might have a very strong impact on fish biodiversity. The second part of my talk, I wanted to explain why and how we try to understand the migration patterns of fish and also of river dolphins, their sensibility or their vulnerability to river fragmentation and the impact caused by dams. Why do we add Bolivian river dolphins to my talk? Because these actually are species which depend on the fish stocks and on fish migration. So Bolivian river dolphin have been shown to have also a migration pattern, a very strong migration upstream following migrating fish. So we also have used this species as a certain indicator for fish migration and try to reveal the impact of dam impacts also on this species. So I also want to talk a bit about this species. So we will now present some actually tools which we are using to study the migration patterns of these groups, combining traditional science with citizen science. So first, to study migration patterns of fish, we have been using different methods based mainly on isotope analysis of otoliths in cooperation with the French IRD and with the University of Porto Velho. For the study of migration patterns of Bolivian dolphins, we have been using mostly satellite transmitters, which have been attached to the dorsal fins of the dolphins. So before talking a bit about dam impacts, we present here the methods which we use to understand better the migration patterns and thus also the vulnerability to dams, no? Because migration, of course, makes the fish very vulnerable to dams. The long distance migration of most of these fish have been mapped through strontium isotope analysis of otoliths, which is a method which has been developed by the French people. I added here two of their most important publications. They showed that the Goliath catfish, Brachyplatystoma rusiosi and Brachyplatystoma platinenum, which are two large catfish, undertake trans-boundary migrations between Brazil and Bolivia, passing the rapids which I showed at the beginning. So analyzing strontium isotopes, they have been showing that these fish actually spawn in Bolivia. They go to the larvae, move or drift to the lower Amazon, and then they return to Bolivia to spawn. So they have some homing behavior, allowing them to pass the rapids. So actually this methodology we are using to understand what happens with those fish as a result of dam construction. In this picture, I actually show two photos which apparently show the same species. It is the same species, Brachyplatystoma rusiosi, but they seem the same size. They seem to have the same size. Actually, the photo at the right is a photo of a fish of 14 years old, which is actually an old reproducing homer, which has passed the barriers, the dams, Girai Sant Antonio, before 2009, before the dams were constructed. Whereas the fish at the left are actually young fish, although they have almost the same size. They weigh less, they have only 9 kilograms and are only 2 years old. So actually these fish, using otolith analysis, have been shown to be the offspring of the old reproducing homers, which we now find in a very small quantity in the upper regions. Actually, these old reproducing homers are now getting extinct. We have predicted that the last of these old reproducing homers will get extinct in 2024. So we can here actually, using this methodology, prove that the dams have a very strong impact on the species. We found only very low quantity of old reproducing homers and a very strong population of forced residents, which cannot pass the barriers downstream to continue their spawning, to their migration to the estuary. So this methodology actually has allowed us to reconstruct spawning and to map the impact of dams on these species. Doing the same type of analysis on river dolphins, but here not using isotopes, but using satellite transmitters, which are attached to the dorsal fins, the place where I put this arrow, the white arrow. We put the satellite transmitters to the dorsal fins, and in this way can reconstruct the migrating patterns of the dolphins. And also in this way, reconstruct their movements along the river and determine their home range. At the same time, we combine this type of analysis with isotope analysis, using stable isotopes of nitrogen and carbon to understand the diets of these dolphins. The diet, of course, reflects also how these species, how these dolphin species depend on certain fish species. And what we found at the bottom left, at the bottom right, is that the dolphins actually have a diet preference for migratory fish predators. So actually we have shown that although the river dolphin does not migrate very long distances, the maximum distance which we found for the species was 300 kilometers, but they depend on fish species which migrate between 500 and 1,000 kilometers. So with this type of analysis, we can actually show that river dolphins are also very sensible and very vulnerable to dams, which interrupt migration of fish species. So here, this only to show how we try to combine different methods using different species to reconstruct and to show and to demonstrate the impacts of dams on aquatic fauna. In the second part of this talk, I would like to show you some other tools which we use to study the dam impacts, because one thing is showing the vulnerability of species to dams, but it's much more difficult to show which type of dam impacts have, because most of these dams have long-term impacts, which are not easy to show by the traditional methods. So what we have been doing is introducing tools based on participatory monitoring of catches and combined with analysis of fishery statistics. These methods have also been used in the lower part of the Madeira, where many people have showed some indications of declining fisheries, both in the middle Madeira and in the lower Madeira, based on fishery statistics. We have used a different analysis, perhaps first here showing some data of these people from Porto Velho and from the lower Madeira, who show a decline in fisheries. We have used a different approach. We have been using not fishery statistics, but we have been using participatory monitoring of catches on board of the fish boats. So we have been asking fishermen to record their catches between 998 and 2022. So in a time span of 20 years. And this has allowed us to have some idea of what these dam impacts eventually might be on the migrating fish species, especially on the gilded catfish, which is a species which migrates 4,000 kilometers between the estuary and the upper Madeira basin. So actually, these fishermen have been using very simple forms, but they have been recording their catches every day during almost 20 years. This data have been published recently in Neotropical Hydrology, and they actually revealed some very interesting things, because perhaps in contradiction with what we expected. First, before showing some data, I wanted to show this infograph. I'm a bit proud of this infograph because we worked on this together with a communication specialist, which made a drawing which reflects very much the participatory work which has been done together with fishermen. At the left, you can see the old fishermen, which have been recording their fish catch between 1908 and 2009. At the right, you can see the sons of these fishermen who have recorded the same catch between 2015 and 2022. I'm very proud of this picture because actually this picture resembles a bit a painting of an old Flemish painter, which is very famous in Belgium, which is Rembrandt. No, I like very much the way how she demonstrated the participatory work of the fishermen during 20 years. Some of the results, I cannot go in a lot of detail, but it's very interesting to see that actually after the dams, many of the predatory fish, such as the surubí, the Pseudopatystoma, and also the Brachypatystoma filamentosum, increased in catch per unit effort, which was a bit against our expectations. Why is this? How do we explain this? We think that these species actually increased in population size some years after the big inundation, the big flooding in 2014, which was an exceptional flooding in this year, and which, as we think, induced a very high productivity of all the fish which left the flooding lakes in the Amazon basin. And these fish eventually might have become available for the predatory fish. So against expectations, after dam construction, some of the predatory species increased in population size, especially the species which do not migrate long distances. But at the same time, only one species decreased in catch per unit effort, which was the gilded catfish, which is the fish at the lower part at the left. So against all expectations, also this species is also predatory. This species actually decreased in size. So actually we could show by this analysis very clear that this species actually, yes, because of its long distance migrating behavior, yes, suffered from dam impacts, whereas the other species were more affected by changing fishing efforts and also by climatic and hydrological factors. Like this participatory monitoring has been proven to be a very strong tool to demonstrate dam impacts. What are now the prospects for the Madeira River Basin? In a very recent study led by Michel Thieme from WWF, we have tried to extrapolate this type of information to the overall Amazon basin. Thieme from WWF has been overlaying data on long-distance migratory fish, turtles and dolphins with the assessment of the free-flowing status of different rivers to identify important freshwater connectivity corridors across the Amazon basin. And this has been published, or is being published now in Conservation Science and Practice, as a new tool to monitor long-term freshwater corridors for fish species. In the right figures, you can see the overlay of the two information sources, which are connectivity status, and on the other hand, the number of migratory species in the most important rivers of the Amazon, below the current scenario at the top, where you can see that most of the rivers are still blue, or still in a good connectivity status. And at the bottom, you can see the same map, but showing the discontinuity in connectivity overlaid with the diversity of migrating fish in the different rivers. So you can see a very important shift between the current scenario and the scenario in the next 10 years. So some conclusions very quick. I think the time has left already, but some conclusions. I think we need in the future more synergy between traditional science and citizen science. So citizen science has been proven to provide different type of data which can be combined quite easily with the more traditional scientific approaches. Also, the analysis which we showed proves that time series of more than 10 years are essential to disentangle the effect of dams, overfishing, fisheries efforts, climatic changes, hydrological variations, etc., on fish populations. So I think it's quite important to put more effort in the collection of long-term time series, which help us to understand much better what are the factors influencing fish migration and dam impacts. Thirdly, participatory fisheries monitoring, not only of landings, but also of catches on board of fishery boats, is a very powerful tool to detect dam impacts on fish. Fourthly, and that's perhaps more a social conclusion, converting fishers to scientists and to environmental stewards may help to understand ecosystem functioning, and their participation in decision-making might eventually also help to prevent or mitigate dam impacts. And then, of course, loss of river connectivity is a major threat for long-distance migrating fish, at the longer term also for medium-distance migrating fish, and as a cascading effect also might impact eventually the rest of the aquatic fauna, such as giant otters and the river dolphins, which we used as an indicator. And then, of course, a very general conclusion is that there is a need for transboundary cooperation in fisheries management and dam mitigation. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul, for your presentation. You give us a good example about a large basin in South America holding representative species as the Arapaima and the Brachyplastistoma, and also the dolphins. So we thank you for your good presentation. And we got a question here from the audience. People ask if there as you show us the data about catchment after and before the dam construction, that could be maybe be assessed by the capture techniques used before and now. Do you think that could be possible or not? Thank you.
Yes, of course. There are many factors which interact, which affect fish populations. So one of the factors which are mentioned is fisheries efforts. The fishermen which recorded the catch before the dams, they used more traditional methods, whereas the catch recorded after the dams were more sophisticated. But we can isolate this factor because actually in this case we have all the data on their effort. So we have been recording all the methods which they have been using, which is a datum which in general for fisheries landings are not available, because we do not record the fisheries effort. So in this type of study, I didn't show all the data, of course, but in this type of study where we have been monitoring catch, we also have been evaluating the efforts, which means that we know how much time they have been fishing and which methods. And we know that certain fishermen have adapted their methods because they introduced new techniques and so on, and they were more efficient, that we can isolate this factor from the other factors. So actually, this is the challenge of our study, that we can separate climatic factors, because we have all the river data, river level data, we have the fisheries effort data, and we also have the dam impact, which we know when it started to interrupt migrations. So of course, this is still a very difficult task to do in the future, try to see what happens. We will never understand everything, no? But we are able, because we have a lot of data, to separate these three factors. And because the impacts on different species are very different, we can eventually exclude the impact of fisheries efforts on the capture per unit effort of the gilded catfish, because they actually capture the 4 species which I showed with the same methods. And this species actually disappeared, even when they kept on catching with the same methods. So for this species, we are now sure that it is a dam impact. Whereas for the other species, it can eventually be a mixture of 2 or 3 factors, external factors.
Well, thank you, Paul Van Damme. So we now move to our next participant, which is a local one. We thank to Luz Jiménez for doing the presentation about Colombian cases. And just a brief presentation of Luz Jiménez Segura. She is a senior professor from the University of Antioquia in Medellin, Colombia. She is a biologist, a professor from the university, work with tropical aquatic systems and response of assemblages of fish species in her research. Also, she focused in fish museum, description of the initial development of freshwater fishes, long-term monitoring of fishes, including larvae and adults, and also assemblage and analysis of changes because of reservoirs, alien species, fisheries. So thank you, Luz, for your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Voy a hablar en español para ser más
I
fluente.
will be speaking in Spanish so I can be more fluent. There are some challenges to preserve Magdalena River and Magdalena River fisheries. Okay, there are some conservation challenges for fish conservation in the Magdalena River, particularly in a river that is known for being the foundation of the Colombian economy. Colombia is what it is thanks to this river, the Magdalena River. However, Colombians who inhabit this basin are not very good negotiators.
Los colombianos
Actually, Colombians, we are very bad at dealing with this river. This is a 3D image. You can see here towards the left, the Cauca River Valley, then the Magdalena River Valley. We also have the foothills of the Orinoco River. Here we have the Magdalena River. Here, there is a big population around it. And due to the presence of human beings here, we have a lot of factors that have an impact on fish conservation, particularly on the fish supply for fishermen. Actually, the presence of fish in the Magdalena River has been declining in the last 50 years. And this is due to the fish conservation challenges that we are facing here. We see this 3D image. We have these three basins, Magdalena, Cauca. The Cauca River is the main tributary of the Magdalena River. There's an important sector here, which is the Cauca River Canyon. And these are called the Cauca River jets. Here we have an influence of different winds that come from the intertropical area, and they blow they blow downwards. And we also have the influence of the other winds that come from the Amazon and the Orinoco River. This is why this basin is very diverse from the climate point of view. So it is clearly marked. It is bimodal. It has 2 times of floods, and it has a high load of sediment. We have a longitudinal and lateral and vertical connectivity, and the intensity of the connectivity changes over the year. Along the Magdalena River, we have 233 species. Most of the species, we know that there is a strong influence in the elevation or the distribution of species. 70% of the species are distributed below the 700 meters above sea level. Most of the species are indigenous species, and some of them migrate. 19 species migrate and sustain the artisanal fisheries, and 40% are threatened species. So we have species that are distributed from low zones to upper zones. Here we have an inverse relationships or ratio in terms of the number of species, and the species that are in low zones, especially migratory ones, they move up to 700 meters, and there are other species that go up to 1,200 meters above sea level. We've been analyzing that there is a relationship between climate or weather seasonality and the spawn or the spawning or the intensity of the spawning of these species and the fisheries yield. So here we have the floating periods linked to El Niño and La Niña phenomena. So we see that the fish yield after very intense periods of El Niño followed by very intense periods of La Niña. So it has an influence after 2 years in the catch of fish. So there is a relationship that is linked to the intensity of the floods and the response of the fish to those intensities. of flooding periods and the dry season. Why 1.5 or 2 years afterwards? Because most of the fish catch is based on prokilodes, and the size is around 19 or 20 centimeters after 13 months. So if we want to have a fish yield and a healthy river, it is very important to preserve the well-being of aquatic systems, the magnitude and duration of the floods, the nutrient contribution that they bring to the floodplain, and the connectivity between aquatic systems. Lateral connectivity and longitudinal connectivity. As I was saying at the beginning, the Magdalena River has 80% of the population. It has a lot of threats, including deforestation, palm plantations, corn plantations. We also have livestock. There's also a disconnection in the vertical gradient, the longitudinal gradient and the lateral gradient. And currently for this presentation, we'll be talking about the fragmentation that occurs due to the formation of dams. And now we go back to the chart that shows us the species distribution. So we will find that a dam, or the impact of a dam, or the change created by a dam, depends on the place in the elevation. So it's not the same, the impact is not the same for a dam that is built above, at 2,000 meters above sea level compared to the one that is built 120 meters above sea level. It also depends on the features of the dam, the turbines. So every scenario, every dam has certain peculiarities, and they will be linked to the conditions of the soil and the fish community that is present there. It is well known that for all dams, they produce changes. They modify the hydrological cycle, they retain sediments, and they remove biological processes related to connectivity of the lowlands with the highlands, and the connectivity between the main flow and the side parts. So these global changes will be the same for every single environment. Today, we are talking about Andean environments or settings. Paul talked a bit about Bolivia. Evelyn will be talking about Chile. And in my case, we are introducing the Andes, particularly in the region of Colombia. In 2014, with a few colleagues, we conducted a review about the reports that were being conducted about the effects of dams and the impacts created by those effects in the fish community. There was a big review of the literature that was available, and it was found that there were 10 big impacts. They are listed here on this table. And at global level, the most common change was the change in the fish assemblage. In Colombia, we see some reports, and in some, we didn't even have the report of the changes in the downstream assemblages. This is in 2014. This was in 2014. It's been almost 10 years. Perhaps there are more studies talking about this. Back then, we realized that there was a need of knowledge in order to contribute to the environmental management of these dams, because currently Colombia relies or depends mostly on hydropower plants. We are making some progress with wind energy and solar energy, but we highly rely on we highly rely on hydropower plants. This is why we need to create a partnership between the academia and the business sector. Universidad de Antioquia is not the only one. We also have other universities that are part of this process, such as Universidad Javeriana. So there is an entire team of researchers that are contributing to this kind of research. Here we'll be providing several examples conducted by University of Antioquia and other universities, just to give you an overview of what we've been doing. Most of the dams up to 1985 were built above 1,000 meters of elevation. And after 1995, they started to be built in lowlands. This was accompanied by a decision of the environmental authority that dams in lowlands needed to have or required monitoring because these zones were more fragile. So we had the opportunity to work in several dams in highlands and in lowlands. And we will be talking about the work that has been conducted in lowlands, particularly in Porsi 2, Porsi 3, Hidrosogamoso, and Hidroituango. We were being asked, or we were asking different questions. If building a lowland dam would change the migratory routes or paths and the spawning grounds, if there were changes in the migratory fish spawning, if these changes were affecting fisheries. There are other questions, and these are the main 4 questions, and I will be talking about 2 or 3 if time allows me. And we had the opportunity to accompany the EPM because they are the ones that manage these dams. And for a 15-year cycle, we started providing this accompaniment in 2005, and we started to see the change over time. So here we have 3 scenarios. Before 4C2, then the scenario with 4C2, this is the river, and each of these circles is one type of assemblage. And we also have the main river. When Porsi 2 was built, there is a new assemblage. When we have the second dam, Porsi 3, again, we have new assemblages. And we have a very strong structure in a very small area, which is a zone that is between 500 and 900 meters, and there is a big change. One of the main important changes is the reduction in the population of one species, where we were able to see the reduction in the abundance of the species because there were zones that were not used for spawning, mainly the streams. And based on that decline, the environmental authority requested larger analysis of the species. So there was a work based on the species diversity, and we found that there was a strong structure. And we thought that maybe there could be a hypothesis that we could use with other small species that inhabit these Andean rivers. We also found what kind of this population was showing signs of inbreeding. So now we are doing some monitoring activities. So we were suggested to do some stocking. However, in order to conduct stocking, we need to have appropriate conditions. Why? stocking if the system is already closed and there are no possibilities to recover the flow. So what we're thinking is that we started to conduct some vulnerability and connectivity analysis in order to propose, instead of stocking, propose the environmental authority, the protection of the basins.
No, sí. Listo. ¿Cómo cambiaron, si cambian las rutas migratorias?
So how do we change the migration routes based on the spawning areas? Here we have Sylvia. She did her PhD in migration routes, and we worked in La Miel, Hidrosogamoso, which are different areas, as well as Kimbo. She worked alongside the company that manages Kimbo, which is Enel. In Hydropower, we already did that also with the University of Cordoba. And we was using the metric from the brand capturing, and the fishermen did carried out the reports. And with this, we got important information such as distances, brand, matched with the time, and went from the Sigamoso River to the Cauca River. So we had important data about the river. Also with studies of hydroplankton, different areas of the Magdalena River. We found those areas that are in pink, which are the most important areas for spawning migrating fish. And recently, the University of Cordoba, with the public utility company in Medellin, is studying more closely the Cauca River area. So here we're seeing the migrating routes with hectoplankton, and they are presenting some different data about the different routes taken by fish. These fish can swim for up to 300 kilometers, and these are important distances. Tomorrow we're gonna have another talk in the morning that is not gonna be at the same time as our symposium. So with this data, we can see the Porce River, more particularly the Porce River. There's Porce 2 and Porce 3. And Porce is a tributary to the Nechi River, which is very important. So Kelly Rivera carried out her master degree studies studying ectoplankton along the Nechi River, including the Porce and the Magdalena River, as we can see over here. What did we find? This is the Magdalena River, this is the Cauca River, this is the Nechi Cauca River, and you can observe how the Nechi River at some moments is important for the spawning, but always in terms of Caucasia and Magdalena over here, this point over here and this other one over here will always be important for spawning. So we also find that, for instance, next to this point, to the unloading area of the Porce desk, we found really low quantities, 3 to 4 embryos. So this confirms that the fish keep moving. Even though there are these reservoirs that the fish keep moving through the basins, but once they get to the reservoir, they find a barrier. So if they don't have space to move, they're gonna stay in front of the dam, and due to the spillers, they can or spillways, they can get harmed. So what are we doing to support the management of the company to rescue those fish that go in through the unloading tunnels, as well as those that are caught along the sides due to changes in the river? And these fish are taken to other areas of the river or downstream. Due to hydropicking or strong changes in the level of the water, basically this led to the generation of a design in order to deliver water using turbines. And this, so using a ramp, and this ramp reduces the change time, the hydro picking, so the fish can live sequentially. So this company actually won a prize for this ramp design, but we're talking about particular examples that are happening. This is not for all reservoirs in the country. So this has led to the environmental authority, based on all this knowledge, to start designing the planning for energy power generation based on actual knowledge. I think I'm going to stop here because we're short on time. Okay, so we have the natural scenario and how the fish spawn naturally alongside the Magdalena River, the La Miel River. We did a test, and here's close to the unloading with the hydro picking. And as they get far away and tributaries enter, the volume of water starts getting back to normal, if you will. We take our larvae from 12 months, and we find out that fish lose the stimulus. We carried out a study in terms of tributaries, number of cells associated to reproductive activity. And we found that for those unregulated systems, there was a relationship between the number of physiological process activators and the natural processes. We have here the hydro picking in the Zeno River. There's not a clear factor associated to the spawning. And what's the environmental agency authority doing right now? They're starting to try to create environmental streams. This was a law from 2020, and they started generating pretty much simulating streams, simulating so what are the challenges? We've seen that the Magdalena has a lot of challenges, and the reservoirs have affected the situation, but the flood area has been decreased by 70%. We're not sure about what the impact of pharmaceuticals that we use is, or the effect of the improvement in the navigation of the alongside or along the river, as well as the using the Magdalena itself for carrying merchandise. So let me end here with the priorities and the challenges to preserve the well-being of the aquatic systems, the magnitude and duration of the floods of the rivers, the nutrient contributions that they bring to the floodplain and connectivity. And we can achieve this by means of planned development, of economic development, like Paul said, use of citizen science, so that people understand the importance of the decisions that are taken in the nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Luz, for your presentation. We got now a good example about a South American river shaped by the Andes Cordillera. And also you show us nice examples of climatic relationships, and also good examples of other kind of monitoring, including ichthyoplankton. So we really appreciate that. One question for you. Do the hydropower companies fund university research to quantify impacts of their operations? And if these impacts are already identified, do they fund research to develop environmental impact mitigation options? And if such funding is common?
Sí, ellos, digamos que en este momento.
We could say that right now, the title of Paul's conference is, the more we know, the more we realize what we don't know and what we have to do. This cooperation between the academy and the private sector allows for the generation of knowledge, but also for us to realize about the changes that are generated in the system. We know what's going on because 30 years ago, when we started this type of research, they told us what is being reported in literature is happening to salmon, to eel. It's not happening to Andean fish. It's not happening in South America. Now we know what's happening and what can happen. What we're doing now is going deeper into management strategies, how to manage that. What I showed you here was a very little sample of what we're doing and that are necessarily linked to a research plan that we're building that is related to the definition of swimming speeds for different types of streams. For instance, within Hydropower, the turbine plan, the operation scenario for Hydropower that wants to simulate when the water goes up. If we can do it, we're going to be able to tell if that will, when the water goes up, there will be a response from the fish. So this is hand in hand with the research plan. Companies alongside universities and research institutes are developing, and this is something that is long-term.
Well, thank you, Luz. And now we finish your presentation and we move to our next participant. We got another example from Los Andes. Our next presentation is Evelyn Javid Conejeros. She is a senior scientist from the Concepción University. She is mainly interested in climatic change, society, and water, including studies in biodiversity and ecosystem services. She also works in ecology and biology of freshwater fishes, impacts introduced by humans, also science for management and mitigation. So if Evelyn is ready, we can start with her presentation. Thank you.
Gracias, Héctor. Efectivamente, voy a presentar el caso de Chile, que también es un...
Thanks, Hector. I'm going to present Chile's case, which is also a Latin case. I'm going to show the scenario on which we'll focus, which is a little different from what we've heard throughout this afternoon. I'm going to keep talking about the effects of the river fragmentation, and I want to go deeper into the role of two parts of life history, which are the migration and body size. And I'm going to talk about fish that are non-migrating, of a small body size. And for these types of species, there are a priori ideas such as that there are species that don't have as much connectivity requirements. Their movements are very short distance, and therefore their dynamics for these populations and communities are very weak. So for this type of ideas, we've driven a priori conclusions in regards to the differences between these species and big migratory species. So nevertheless, given the displacement of fish goes way beyond migrations, all fish do some kind of displacement at some point of their life cycle related to activities such as feeding, search for shelter, and so on. But in terms of the movements themselves, they're so important because at different points they need to rescue certain populations to be able to restock areas of the basins. so that they can have genotypes from which to select. And in the end, this will lead to the restocking and eventually events such as climate change. So within this context, Chile in South America is somewhat different to Colombia, Brazil, and Bolivia. Chile is alongside the Andes with a very narrow valley. And in this topography, we have a hydrography where there's a series of hydrographic basins that run parallelly from north to south. We have very recent glaciers alongside or along these basins, restocking these environments, and they're also characterized by the fact that they go from east to west. These are rivers that are somewhat short, but if we focus on the central south area, these are basins that shelter the most quantity of fish in the country. 67% of them live there, and it corresponds to one of the biodiversity hotspots in the world. And as any biodiversity hotspot in the world, it's not only characterized by a high level of endemic species, but also by facing a high level of human activity that is generating an impact. And here we can see one of them, that is the hydropower development. We can see that this biodiversity area, a biodiversity hotspot, corresponds to the area that is the hydropower development hotspot. This part in red represents the number of actual current barriers and the scenario for the year 2050 if we exploit all of the hydropower potential that we have in this river. And on the other hand, it represents the number of native fish. Here we can see that it's way lower, 46 species in the whole country, that the maximum per basin of 48. So high level of endemic species. And in relation to the two different types of life history, we can see the maximum size for these fish once they're adults. A great percentage of them are not yet bigger than 15 centimeters. And another proportion is from 15 to 25 centimeters. So they're actually very small. And in terms of their migratory trademarks, they're non-migrating residents. So there are a set of species that can be classified undoubtedly as small-sized and resident. So the question here is, if you're wondering that's a fish, how important is the relation between connectivity in this type of Andean rivers and this very small fauna? We begin posing the formulation of two fragmentation indices, the number of hydrographic barriers, and the length of the fragments that remain. We have the fragmentation index 0 to 1. As they grow, the fragmentation is greater. So we also have this greater or longest fragment, which we consider to be of this type. They don't go out to the sea, but this is important, and the length of the fragment is greater for them. This is the result, real quick, of 8 studied basins. We see the current fragmentation situation. higher than expected for 2050. The hydropower potential will be a lot greater, and we can see the behavior of the indices for the basins with different fragmentation indices. When we study the assemblages and compare high fragmentation basin-based compared to the opposite, we lose a migratory species, the Geotria australis. We also lose catfish, which are very sensitive, and some species are reduced, such as the endemic ones from Chile and Inanga in New Zealand. We see the variables over here. 2 of the 3 variables correspond effectively to variables that have to do with fragmentation as the type of barrier and the number of barriers downstream in terms of the site where the sample is taken. And this is the result in comparison to the second index, the longest fragment, where you can see an inverse relationship with the beta diversity. Here, this index is, when it's lower, you get a greater beta diversity. And when you have fragments of river that are longer, if you have the same number of barriers, the beta diversity is lower, or it maintains with a greater similarity between the communities at the basin. On the other hand, when the fragments are short, the beta diversity goes up. When we combine both indices, what we see in the future hydropower development, some basins are going to be way more developed than others, or more altered, if you will. Here's the river alongside our university. And this basin where I'm going to be centered has certain particularities. Is the highest native fish species richness. I said earlier that it was 18. And it has dams in its main course. But it also has a lot of hydro picking. We selected a species, and I ask you to pay attention to that individual, and it corresponds to these species. And this species was interesting to us because, first of all, it complied with all requirements. It's a very small size. And like I mentioned, it's a resident fish, and it complies with everything that is shown there, as well as the behavior that you can see in the video. It's a species that you would expect to not be very much affected by the pollution.
Here we studied the main rivers, and they have runoff river stations. This other river doesn't have any type of barrier, and the main river, where we have the big dams that I was mentioning. This is a study, a genetic study. And here I will be showing you the genetic populations that we found on the northern river. Here you see that we have 2 types of population. The arrows show the flow, and very clearly here we can see the effect of a natural barrier such as this one. If we see the southern part, it doesn't have any barriers. Similarly, we found 2 populations, but unlike the previous one, the populations flow upstream and downstream. It wasn't possible before. due to the waterfalls, and the situation in the Biobío River, the red triangles show the main three hydropower stations. In some cases, we also see genic flow upstream when we are below this other station. What's interesting here is that we did not find any specimen. We also wondered or asked ourselves how these movements were happening. This is why we conducted some analysis. Let me show you the Maleco River results. This one doesn't have any dams or barriers. In this chart, each of the bars represents a specimen. This is a study based on the otoliths. This is when the fish is being caught, and this is color-coded based on the position or the part of the river where they were caught. Here, this is the edge of the otolith, which marks the place where the fish was, including the microchemical conditioner status. And we were able to deduct the origin and the movement. And the most surprising fact is that what we see here are how the fish travel upstream. Most of the specimens were caught in the lower area of the river or the middle area, even one which was caught in the upper area. This indicates that actually these fish move a lot, even a distance of 30 kilometers upstream. Well, there are other results, but due to time constraints, I cannot show you all the results. I just wanted to wrap this up by telling that it is possible to conduct planning of hydropower development, and as a group, as a study group, I will be showing you some example. I think my colleague Oscar will be showing you other examples. In this case, we are using both fragmentation indices for the Biobío River basin to show you the position of or the location of these barriers along the river. So we can see that the output would be maximized and negative effects on the fish communities minimized if new hydropower plants can be located in tributaries in the upper basin. Because I think this is the first question that we need to ask ourselves. If we need to remove these barriers in the upper part of the river, these are the big conclusions. The first one is that actually the alteration in river connectivity is the major threat for resident small-bodied fish species in Chile. And second, developing countries still can make better decisions about economic growth based on scientific knowledge. I just wanted to thank the entire task force because this is the result of a team. This is the result of teamwork. This is not individual work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evelyn, for your presentation. You give us a good example of how also small rivers and small fishes could be impacted by human use and also development of hydroelectric dams. Certainly, Chilean composition of fishes is known as as a high degree of endemisms. There are strange fishes only living there, and not only fishes, but also amphibians. So you give us a nice pictures also of this kind of biodiversity and also their genetics. So we got a question for you. You talk about the development of dams, what is planned till the 2050. And the question is, what else could be, if there is considered some biological issues like the level of endemism to plan that, and if there is another issue that we might be looking for the conservation of fishes. Thank you.
Sí, claro, efectivamente.
Yes, of course. The proposals that we are working on are related to species that are under the conservation category, and they are also endemic. I would also like to add that not only the fish are the ones that need to be considered when it comes to planning, but also we need to think about indigenous peoples and other conservation targets in order to provide proper classification or ranking. For instance, in the modeling that we conducted, where we are proposing that the best location for barriers is in the tributary rivers, these small rivers that are still free-flowing. Here's where indigenous peoples inhabit. And I would like to highlight this. This is our proposal. This is very specific to fish. And we think that conservation strategies should consider other conservation targets, including the fact that there are still free-flowing rivers.
Thank you, Evelyn, for your presentation. We now move to our last researcher, who is Paulo Pompeu. He is a biologist from Brazil. Paulo Pompeu works in the Lavras Federal University. This is in Minas Gerais, a state from Brazil. His main research interest is fish ecology, also river restoration, and fish species conservation. And he do projects related to dam management and also fisheries in Brazil. He has a degree of biology in 1994 and has a PhD degree in environmental sciences and hydrology from Federal University of Minas Gerais. Actually, is a titular main professor in the University of Lavras, and also work with environmental impact and also river flood in South American rivers. So thanks, Paulo, for being here. And now the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Hector. It's a pleasure to be here. And my talk is, the more we learn, it seems the greater are the challenges for the conservation of South American migratory fish fauna. Well, we live in a very peculiar region in the world. We are located in a hotspot for biodiversity, especially for freshwater fish. We know that here in South America, like in Africa and in Asia, many people depends on the fisheries for survive. And for most of them, fisheries is the main source of protein. At the same time, a lot of rivers have been severely regulated, especially by hydropower dams. And since migratory species are the most important for fisheries here in South America, they are the most affected by them because they perform different kinds of movements. And they are an important component of local biodiversity. Their conservation is a major challenge for us. One of the main strategies adopted to deal with the impacts of dams on the migratory fish fauna was the construction of fish passes. Here we have on the left, here is the mouth, a fish lift built a Grande River in the Upper Paraná Basin, and on the right, also in the Upper Paraná Basin, a fish ladder. The problem is, despite the high investments and efforts involved, most facilities have been considered ineffective in preserving the populations of target species. But why we know that? Especially because we have a dam, we have built different facilities, and the fish populations, especially for the migratory fish, keep declining. Several recent studies have addressed this issue, trying to understand why the fish passes are not working and eventually could be causing more problems than mitigating the impact of them. In this paper, with Fernando Piscis and Angela Gushin, we have discussed that one of the reasons of this big problem. Oh, sorry, I will turn on my camera. Right. One of the reasons is that when we build a fish pass, we are only considering the obstacle represented by the dam, but there is a second barrier represented by the reservoir, especially when the reservoir is big. When we consider the upstream movement, depending on the size of the reservoir, the fish can complete the migration and could eventually go upstream. But especially the downstream movements, the reservoir represent a big barrier. If we consider that one important part of the life cycle of our migratory species is the downstream movements of eggs and larvae towards the floodplain, for them, for the ichthyoplankton, it's almost impossible to cross a big reservoir. Depending on the size of the reservoir, all the recruitment could be affected by the reservoir and by the dam. Another problem related to the presence or not of the critical habitats necessary for the migratory fish species to complete their life cycle. And in most rivers in South America, we have a sequence of dams, like a cascade of dams, finding populations within short reaches lacking critical habitats. This situation, for instance, we have a dam in the middle here. If we put a ladder, we would be linking nowhere, nothing, because we don't have a river anymore. And it's interesting that in many cases, a fish ladder have been installed. This kind of situation, then actually there's no reason for that. Actually, there's a reason. The reason is to show the population that we are trying to do something for the fish. But in this case, there is nothing to be done, but because there is no river anymore. But the main objective of this presentation is to show you new information on the migratory behavior of the most abundant South American migratory fish genus, the Prochilodus, and show you that at least for the São Francisco Basin, the movement patterns may be more complex and specific than previously thought, further limiting the use of fish passes as the main conservation strategy. The Prochilodus genus is very famous in the continent. In Brazil, it has several names like Curimbatá, Curimba. In Argentina is the Sábalo, and here in Colombia is the Bocachico. We have performed radiotelemetry studies at the upper São Francisco River Basin, upstream Três Marias Dam. This is the reservoir of Três Marias, the first one along the basin. And we are studying this part of the basin since 2014 in order to better understand the behavioral patterns of the two Prochilodus species native from the São Francisco Basin, Prochilodus costatus and Prochilodus argentus. Since 2014, we have tagged 25 individuals of Prochilodus argentus and more than 400 individuals of Prochilodus costatus. along this region, and this is a long stretch of free-flowing river from the headwaters until the Três Marias Reservoir. The São Francisco River is about 400 kilometers long. We have installed here 11 fixed stations to capture the signal of the fishes that were tagged with this radio telemetry tag. I will initially show you some data from the fish that were tagged immediately upstream of the Três Marias Reservoir. These fish were captured, tagged, and released at the same site. And for both species tagged at this region, for both of them, they have a highly synchronic reproductive cycle relying on environmental cues, such as changing water temperature, flow, and photo period, to perform upstream migration, spawn, and return to their feeding grounds. Here on the right, we have the data of upstream when the line go up, and downstream migration when the line started to reduce, for 3 following migration periods, 2014 to 2015, and so on. And what we can observe here is that the fish started migrating upstream immediately after the first rain, when the river started to rise at the beginning of the rainy season, in our case, late September, beginning of October. This graph here on the right belongs to Plodus cristatus, and here on the left, Plodus argenteus, the same pattern. All the fish started moving upstream at the beginning of the rainy season. And just as a curiosity, most of the migration is performed upstream during the new moon. Most curious here is that we have a high degree of temporal and spatial fidelity for both spawning and feeding sites. It's quite hard to track a fish during 2 consecutive years due to the battery life that is reduced, then it's quite hard. And only for 7 Plodus cristatus, we track them along 2 different years. For this individual here, this guy decided in 2016 to form its upstream migration on November 13th, the same day in the following year. And when we check for all the fish we were able to track 2 different migrations in following years, the maximum difference in days is 10 days. Then we have a short window for migration. They have a very specific time to go upstream. But after reaching the spawning ground, they spend up to 3 months there, and they will go back in different days. For instance, these individuals came back in April in 2015, in March in 2016. They decided to go back after the big rains, because when the river floods, these fish started breeding. But in my opinion, the most important information here is that after breeding, all the fish go back exactly to the same site where they were tagged at the feeding site. Then we have a homing behavior, very well defined to the feeding site. But we also were interested in defining if they have homing behavior related to the breeding site. And then we tagged more individuals, but not now upstream the Três Marias Reservoir, but at the breeding site, at the place we already know that these fish moves to reproduce. And then we tagged this fish during the migratory period. And what happened? Let's see this fish here, the number 4. This fish was tagged in this region of the river near the headwaters. After the breeding period, they go back to the feeding site. In the following year, they came to the same breeding site, go back to the same feeding site, and go back again to the same breeding site. Actually, what we are seeing here is that the fish form the same movements along between 2 well-defined points of the basin, the breeding site and the feeding site. And the homing behavior is very well defined. We now know how many days the fish spend in each critical habitat. Most of the year they stay at the feeding ground. They spend days moving upstream. They spend up to 3 months at the spawning ground, and in only 5 days they will be back at the feeding site. But we had also some data on eggs and larvae that complement the information on their life cycle. We formed ichthyoplankton sampling from October 2019 to March 2015. Every 3 days, all these 6 points were sampled. We analyzed the data using meta barcoding because we were interested not only in the breeding sites for all the migratory species, but specifically for the Proculodus. And for our surprise, along this breeding period, the Proculodus spawned only once, only in a single day. And what is more interesting is that both species spawn exactly at the same day, January 24th, exactly the same point, only 2 points at the headwaters. It was a big surprise with a lot of consequences in terms of conservation. The same project, we have also compared this information on these migratory species that have self-sustainable populations upstream of Três Marias with some fish that were captured downstream Três Marias Dam, released into the reservoir or released upstream of the reservoir, trying to simulate a fish pass. We know that the migratory movements are very complex. They have homing behavior, but if I put a fish ladder here into the dam, what would happen? Well, here we will compare 4 different kinds of behavior. What we call patrol, here in back, are the individuals that stayed at the same place. And it is important to say that the movements I have described before are related to those fish that decided to migrate upstream. But not all the population decided to migrate. Depending on the year, from 50% to 70% of the population go upstream for spawning. A percentage of the population every year decided to stay and do not reproduce, just staying at the feeding home. And this kind of pattern of staying in a single location we call patrol. The fish that decided to go upstream are in blue, the ones that go downstream are in red, and we have also a 4th kind of behavior we call erratic behavior. These fish are completely lost. They go upstream, downstream, upstream, downstream. They don't know where they are. Well, the first bar, the local fish, those ones I have presented the behavior, and most of them go upstream, what we were expecting, and some of them go downstream, some decided to stay at their location. Okay, the fish that were translocated to the river, we capture them, put in a truck, and bring them to the upper San Francisco River. Some of them remain at the site where they were released. Most of them in green. Oh, where's the mouse? Green. Their behavior was erratic. They were completely lost. Only a small amount went upstream, and a good number of fish tried to go back downstream to the dam. They go downstream. And the fish that were released into the reservoir, the case that represented if we have installed the fish ladder in Três Marias Dam, all of them remained into the reservoir. They could not find a route for migration, and most of them stayed near some cages for tilapia raising, just probably feeding from the food they give to the fish there. Then they have a kind of fast food nearby the dam and did not perform any migration, indicating that in this case, at least in this case, makes no sense to install a fish pass. Well, concluding, the observation of these patterns helps to explain the failure of most of the fish passes installed in South America, at least for the Proculodus, because in general, such mechanisms cause great delays in migration. And now we know that the fish has a time for migration. We have a window, a migration window. They have to return to the feeding grounds, and this is a fundamental but neglected aspect. We had no idea that a Proculodus would be territorial, would have a place for feeding, will go to reproduce, and will have to go back to his home. It's completely new for us. In several rivers with cascading dams, there is a high chance that most of the spawning and feeding sites have been eliminated and are unreachable. Then it seems that at least these Proculodus are not flexible in terms of the place for feeding and the place for breeding. Transposed fish may not find migration routes. Therefore, only the maintenance of significant stretch of non-regulated rivers and maintaining the connectivity with critical habitats would maintain viable populations of the studied migratory species of these at least. But these results could be applied to other neotropical migratory fish species, but we need to test it. We need to investigate fish from other genus and other families because we have a huge diversity of migratory fish here in South America. Most of these results have already been published, but some papers have been submitted, especially those ones related to the homing behavior for the breeding site and the second species, the Proculodus argenteus. And thank you very much. Gracias.
Thank you, Paulo, for your presentation. You give us a good example of Brazilian boca chicos and their behavior in migration. So you show how a hotspot in South America can respond in different strategies in their behavior. So we got a question here from the audience, and it says that what could be the context for a Brazilian river having too many dams in a cascade example? So we should still focus on mitigation strategies, or what do you think could be the example for such heavily impacted river? Thank you.
Thank you, Hector. I would say that instead of focusing only on mitigation, we have focused on planning. We do need to keep, at least in every big basin, a sub-basin without dams to preserve the migratory fish species. It will be very difficult to put a lot of dams in a basin and keep these populations. There are no mitigation for that. Then I think that a free-flowing river strategy is the best one to keep big rivers without dams. I do believe that in the future we'll be removing dams, but to allow the colonization of these rivers in the future, we need to have a healthy population of the migratory species. Then you do need to have rivers as reserves to allow the recolonization of our rivers in the future when we have other ways of producing energy.
Thank you, Paulo, for your presentation. You give us a good example of Brazilian boca chicos and their behavior in migration. So you show how a hotspot in South America can respond in different strategies in their behavior. So we got a question here from the audience, and it says that what could be the context for a Brazilian river having too many dams in a cascade example? So we should still focus on mitigation strategies, or what do you think could be the example for such heavily impacted river? Thank you.
Thank you, Hector. I would say that instead of focusing only on mitigation, we have focused on planning. We do need to keep, at least in every big basin, a sub-basin without dams to preserve the migratory fish species. It will be very difficult to put a lot of dams in a basin and keep these populations. There are no mitigation for that. Then I think that a free-flowing river strategy is the best one to keep big rivers without dams. I do believe that in the future we'll be removing dams, but to allow the colonization of these rivers in the future, we need to have a healthy population of the migratory species. Then you do need to have rivers as reserves to allow the recolonization of our rivers in the future when we have other ways of producing energy.
Thank you, Paulo. Now we move to Paul Kemp for him to give us up to 5 to 10 minutes of a final closure. So with this, we should finish our day today. So Paul Kemp, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Hector. I just think that was a really fascinating set of presentations today from South America, Africa, and Asia. We really focused on the challenges. I'm looking forward to the second part of the symposium tomorrow, where we'll be focusing on looking at some of the solutions. I'm going to open it up to some questions and comments from the participants or the attendees. But before I do that, I want to very quickly thank all the speakers for some fantastic presentations. I'd like to thank Luz and the team for dealing with a lot of technical issues early on. And also all the participants and attendees for some really excellent questions that made the debate really interesting as we went through the day. So with that, I'm now going to ask people, based on the fact that today was all about focusing on challenges, what do people think was the theme or any particular common issues that came out from today's talks? And you can raise your hand if you want to comment on that.
So we got an open question here. So anyone who wants to participate can turn the camera on and make the question. Thank you.
I have a question. I don't know if it's possible to hear me. Yeah.
Could you put your camera on, please?
Oh,
Evelyn?
sorry. Yeah, my question is, after listening all this presentation and of course, after reading a lot of papers about issues of, it's okay? After reading a lot of papers and about hydropower problems, my question for all of you and for you in particular, Paul, is: do you think exists the possibility to have a sustainable hydropower development, or as Paulo said in the final part of his presentation, we have to start thinking in removing dams instead how to mitigate impacts of dams?
That's a really good question, Evelyn. It's about whether or not, I suppose it's how you define sustainability. And we could probably discuss that. Luz, did you have your hand up?
Yes, but I have two questions. I have two questions. One is very related with what said Evelyn, and the another one, certainly we are a team from different parts of the world. Maybe we can ask questions that can be tested or proved hypotheses using the same method in the same different places around the world. And I know we need funds, but maybe if we begin to make the proposal to use the different methods you showed today, maybe we can do wonderful research in order to hydropower sustainability. Sometimes people smiles when you talk about environmental sustainability with dams. Yes, then you might really smile. But we must try. We must keep on, because we need to preserve rivers and fishes for fishers. That is.
Thank you, Luz. So some questions from Evelyn and Luz there about sustainability. Would anyone like to pick up on that and give us some comments and suggestions what they think? Do we remove all dams, or do we try and live with hydropower in a more sustainable way? And if so, how do we do that?
Well, I have a comment on that. In the past, we used it to kill whales to get their oil and have light in our cities. We used the whale oil for that. And we just abandoned this practice after discovering the hydropower. And then we changed the way that the lights in our cities works. And today, when we look to the past, it's ridiculous to kill such an animal to have light in a city. But the change was promoted because we had a new technology. Then I do believe that only we have a new technology able to supply power for us, we will abandon the hydropower, but it will last a lot, probably many years. Then we have no choice. We need to do better with the hydropower. Of course, some of them will be removed because the cost-benefit analysis have been improved. We started knowing better the price of losing fish and compare with the price of producing power. Some countries are doing that better and figure out that in some cases it's better to remove the dam. That will have more money than the money produced with the energy. But we are in such a stage where planning is the only option we have. And especially for the better planning, we need better information. And in most places, we don't have enough information for planning. We have no idea what would be the consequence of putting a dam here and not there. And we need this information as soon as possible for a better planning, because we cannot depend on when we will have a totally renewable power source of energy. We don't know where it will happen. We have already some sources, important sources, but probably they will not solve the problems in the near future.
Thank you, Paolo. And then Andre, you also have a comment.
Just open up my camera here. The thing is, so much has changed in the past, I don't know, 2-3 years. And that has to be taken into account when we're talking about renewable energy and sustainability. I mean, we had a pandemic, and now we had a war that's just making the prices of gasoline, the oil per se, very, very high. And people are looking into alternatives to not to be so restrained in one country that's producing a lot of oil or has to produce gas and somehow. So now is really, really the time to talk about what Paulo just mentioned as to planning and to have an alternative in order to analyze what to do with the dams and how to make dams or the electrical power more sustainable, if it is possible at all. But again, I think it's dark times, and people are shaken by pandemic, people are shaken by the war, and we are talking about removing dams, and they know they depend on energy, so it's going to be very delicate, and we had to know how to deal with those very scared and hard people around the globe.
Okay, so we've got one last comment. We're running out of time, so I'm going to pass over to Paul van Damme to follow up on what Andre said.
Yeah. I don't think we have big answers for this question, but focusing on what we are doing, I think it is important, listening also to the presentations, to realize that there is this very strong contrast between the simplicity of a hydropower station and the complexity of the biological systems. And although it takes us in general 5, 10, 15 years to discover the complexity after the construction. So actually we should know the complexity before they construct. So I think that we have to invent a science, invent scientists who can react much more fast, who can really investigate, publish, and use the information to do advocacy much sooner, much quicker. Because we as an actor are much too late, and much of these impacts already have created 15, 20 years ago in the time lapse of the impacts is also very long. So I think we come too late as a scientist to show the complexity. I think we have to do much more efforts to work quicker and to publish faster and to use our information to do advocacy and invest much more in advocacy. So I think that's perhaps more low scale, small scale, but I think that's something which eventually can help to sustain hydropower energy generation.
And say goodbye for registration. So what do you think?
Yeah, so basically just to thank everybody. There's lots of really interesting comments there on the sustainability issues, something we can talk about for many hours afterwards, and I'm sure we will. But that brings it to the end of this session, and tomorrow I'm very much looking forward to us moving on to some of the solutions. So thank you again to everybody, and thank you to all of those that attended online, and have a great evening or morning or afternoon, depending where you are in the world. And hopefully we'll see you again tomorrow at the same time.